On Friday, Trump told reporters Iran was finished. Navy gone, Air Force gone, air defenses flattened. He said you don't call a ceasefire when you're in the process of thoroughly defeating the other side. 72 hours later, he announced a 5-day pause and called it the result of productive conversations. Iran's response was immediate. Their parliament speaker said there were no conversations. The man who declared total victory is now asking for a timeout. The country absorbing the bombs is the one telling him no. The United States military spends close to $1 trillion a year. It fields 13,000 aircraft, 11 nuclear-powered carriers, and the most advanced weapon systems ever assembled by any nation in history. The country on the other side has been strangled by sanctions for decades. Its entire defense budget doesn't come close to 2% of what America spends. No stealth bombers, no fifth-generation fighters, no carrier fleet. And yet, Iran pushed both American carrier strike groups over 1,000 kilometers backward. It tracked and struck an F-35. It ripped out America's radar and missile defense infrastructure across multiple countries. It shut down the Strait of Hormuz and triggered what the IEA is now calling the worst energy disruption since the 1970s. And after more than 3 weeks of relentless bombing, Iran is still firing at Israel, at American bases, at Diego Garcia, 4,000 kilometers from its own border, still refusing every offer to talk. The plan that fell apart. The original strategy was never meant to be a war, it was supposed to be a message. Pentagon planners and Trump advisors reportedly framed it as a 4 to 7 day operation, overwhelming air power, surgical strikes on Iran's military infrastructure, and then capitulation. Iran would crumble fast, the Strait of Hormuz would reopen, and Trump would fly to China at the end of March having delivered a geopolitical masterstroke. That was the plan. That is not what happened. By day 24, what Trump was communicating to the press changed almost by the hour. On Friday evening, he posted on Truth Social that America was considering winding down operations. By Saturday, he reversed completely, issuing a 48-hour ultimatum threatening to destroy Iran's power plants if the strait wasn't reopened. By Sunday night, he was reportedly dispatching Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner for back-channel talks. That deadline expired Monday morning. He did not strike. Instead, he announced the 5-day pause and claimed Iran was eager to deal. Iran's parliament speaker, identified in American media as Trump's alleged negotiating partner, denied any talks took place and called the pause an American attempt to escape the quagmire. 1 hour, Trump declares total victory. The next, he threatens annihilation. The hour after that, he offers a ceasefire. Then he claims negotiations the other side says never happened. He called NATO allies cowards for not helping reopen the strait, then asked those same allies for assistance. He told reporters he would never put boots on the ground, then added, and these were his exact words, "If I were, I certainly would not tell you." That's not strategy. That is a man searching for an exit he cannot locate. And the reason he can't find one starts with what Iran did to America's most expensive weapons program. The F-35 the Pentagon didn't want to talk about. On March 19th, a U.S. Air Force F-35A Lightning II made an emergency landing at a regional base after a combat mission over Iran. The pilot had shrapnel wounds. CENTCOM confirmed the landing but declined to specify the cause. That same day, Iran's Revolutionary Guard released footage it described as a direct hit on the aircraft. 2 sources with knowledge of the situation confirmed to American media that the jet had been struck by an Iranian munition. This would mark the first publicly confirmed case in history of an F-35 taking enemy fire in combat. The entire $1 trillion F-35 program rests on a single core promise: stealth. The aircraft's geometry and radar-absorbent coating make it nearly invisible to conventional radar systems. Iran didn't bother with conventional radar. Iran used passive infrared tracking, systems that detect the heat signature from the engine exhaust rather than electromagnetic reflections off the airframe. The specific platform reportedly used is the Majid, a domestically modified Iranian infrared-guided missile system. The F-35 was flying deep inside Iranian airspace on a penetration strike mission. That flight profile tells you CENTCOM believed Iranian air defenses had already been neutralized. That assessment was wrong. No photograph of the damaged aircraft has been publicly released. The pilot survived, but the condition of a $100 million stealth fighter after taking Iranian fire remains officially unconfirmed. Now consider who else flies this aircraft. Japan, South Korea, Australia, Singapore, the United Kingdom. Half of NATO either operates F-35s or has orders pending. If a nation under crippling sanctions with a fraction of America's defense budget can track and strike this jet using passive infrared sensors, the entire strategic justification for the platform changes overnight. And the thermal signature data the IRGC now holds from that engagement is worth more to Chinese and Russian counter-stealth programs than a decade of espionage. We'll come back to why that matters. But the F-35 was not the only thing falling out of the sky. The drones, the Eagles, and the tanker nobody mentioned. By March 17th, more than a dozen MQ-9 Reaper drones had been confirmed destroyed during the operation. Some were shot down by Iranian air defenses. Others were struck on the ground by incoming missiles. Each Reaper cost between $13 and $16 million. At confirmed numbers, that's over $200 million in drone losses alone. Here's the thing. The Air Force actually stopped ordering new Reapers back in 2020 because planners already knew they were too slow and too visible against any competent air defense network. They were counter-terrorism tools designed to loiter over Afghanistan and strike targets that couldn't shoot back. Sending them into Iranian airspace against a military that had spent years preparing for exactly this scenario was a doctrinal mismatch. Iran exploited it using the same passive infrared approach that hit the F-35. Then there are the 3 F-15E Strike Eagles. On day 2 of the conflict, March 1st, all 3 were downed over Kuwait in what CENTCOM described as a friendly fire incident caused by Kuwaiti air defenses. All 6 crew members ejected safely. 3 advanced American fighters lost in a single friendly fire event? That does not happen in modern warfare. Not with the identification friend or foe systems these jets carry. No detailed explanation has been provided. The incident remains under investigation. Each F-15E is worth roughly $87 million. That's $261 million gone before the war was 48 hours old. Then add the KC-135 refueling tanker that crashed in western Iraq on March 12th, killing all 6 crew aboard. In an incident the U.S. military said involved neither hostile nor friendly fire. 13 American service members killed, roughly 200 wounded. Those are Pentagon-confirmed numbers. But those aircraft losses, as staggering as they are not the primary reason Trump offered a 5-day pause. The reason for that is what Iran did to America's eyes, and that story is considerably worse. Blinding the giant. America's radar network destroyed. On the opening day of the war, February 28th, Iranian forces struck the AN FPS-132 Block 5 early warning radar near Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Satellite imagery confirmed the hit. Debris from one of the radar's 3 phased array faces scattered across the building's roof. This is not a portable unit you can swap out in a few days. The AN FPS-132 is a massive fixed installation, a UHF phased array system that tracks ballistic missiles at ranges exceeding 5,000 kilometers. It provides 360-degree early warning coverage for every layered defense system in the region. Qatar purchased it in 2013 for $1.1 billion. It is the only one deployed anywhere outside the continental United States. Pentagon sources estimate 5 to 8 years to replace it. Iran targeted it first, because destroying it was a force multiplier for every single missile strike that followed. Once that radar went dark, every intercept became harder, every warning window compressed. Iran knew precisely what that would do to the American defensive posture. Most people assume THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, is essentially untouchable. In reality, THAAD is only as capable as its radar. The ANTPY-2 is THAAD's sensory system. Without it, the battery is a launcher with no eyes. Only 16 of these radars exist on Earth. Each costs somewhere between $250 million and $1 billion. Satellite imagery confirmed Iranian strikes damaged or destroyed ANTPY-2 radars at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, where photos show a blackened site with large craters flanking destroyed radar trailers. Additional damage was confirmed at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, at Al Dhafra in the UAE, and at Al Sadr, also in the UAE, where multiple buildings took direct hits in the first 72 hours of the conflict. The Jordan radar was reportedly destroyed by Iranian drones costing between $20,000 and $60,000 each. A $60,000 weapon destroyed a system worth up to $1 billion. That cost ratio tells you more about this conflict than any press conference. Total confirmed radar losses amount to roughly $2.7 billion. Total U.S. equipment losses in the first 14 days are estimated near $4 billion. To fill the gaps, the Pentagon started pulling THAAD and Patriot systems out of South Korea and redeploying them to the Gulf. That weakens deterrence against North Korea to patch a defense shield in a region where the shield is already shredded. And Iran's missiles continue to cost a fraction of what it takes to stop them, with Iran able to manufacture replacements faster than Lockheed Martin can. The $13 billion carrier docked in Greece, USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most expensive warship ever built at $13 billion, caught fire in its laundry room on March 12th. It took over 30 hours to extinguish. 600 sailors lost their sleeping quarters. More than 200 were treated for smoke inhalation. The ship had already been at sea for nearly 10 months straight, redeployed from the Venezuela operation to the Middle East with zero downtime. Its plumbing systems had developed recurring failures. Morale had reportedly collapsed. The Navy launched an investigation into whether the fire was deliberately set by crew members attempting to end their deployment. The Ford sailed to Suda Bay in Crete for repairs on March 18th. It is out of the fight. Meanwhile, satellite imagery showed the USS Abraham Lincoln had pulled back to roughly 1,100 kilometers from the Iranian coast, up from approximately 350 kilometers at the start of operations. The U.S. called it a controlled reallocation. The operational reality is a retreat. Both carrier strike groups are now beyond the engagement range of Iran's coastal weapon systems. China watched that happen. Russia watched it happen. Every defense ministry on Earth is watching it happen, and every country that operates American weapons or hosts American bases is quietly running new calculations. But none of this, not the downed aircraft, not the burning carrier, not the shredded radar network, was the single factor that stopped Trump from pulling the trigger on Iran's power grid, the weapon that costs Iran nothing. Since roughly March 4th, Iran has enforced an effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz using radio warnings, direct attacks on merchant vessels, and the total collapse of commercial shipping insurance. 20% of the world's daily oil supply flows through that 21-mile-wide channel, around 20 million barrels a day. When Iran shut it down, the impact was immediate, and it was global. Brent crude crossed $100 per barrel by March 8th and later hit session highs around $126. Gulf oil production dropped by at least 10 million barrels a day by mid-March, the single largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. The IEA released 400 million barrels from emergency reserves, a step described as unprecedented. Major shipping firms suspended all Middle East routes. Over 150 ships sat anchored outside the strait, waiting. At least 21 confirmed Iranian attacks on commercial vessels. Fertilizer prices surged directly, threatening the American Midwest planting season as farmers scrambled to lock in preseason inputs. Goldman Sachs raised its probability of a U.S. recession this year to 25%. India's Prime Minister Modi compared the crisis to COVID and began repatriating over 220,000 Indian nationals from the Gulf. IEA Chief Fatih Birol stated that 40 energy facilities across 9 countries had been severely damaged and called the situation worse than the 1973 and 1979 oil shocks combined. And Iran's most devastating weapon, the strait closure, costs Tehran nothing to maintain. There are no missiles to fire, no fuel to burn, just a standing threat and the economic destruction it creates every single day the tankers don't move. What happens if you try to force the strait open by destroying Iran's power grid? That's the exact question that was sitting on Trump's desk Monday morning. The threat that killed the escalation. Trump issued his 48-hour ultimatum on Saturday. Reopen the strait or Iran's power plants get destroyed. Iran's parliament speaker responded within hours. If power plants were struck, he said, critical energy infrastructure across the entire Gulf would be irreversibly destroyed. Iran's defense council warned that any strike on Iranian coasts or islands would trigger mine laying across Gulf shipping lanes. Iran named Saudi Arabian, Emirati, Bahraini, Kuwaiti, and Qatari energy and water systems as specific retaliatory targets. Saudi oil terminals, Emirati desalination plants, the infrastructure that keeps the Gulf states alive. That was the calculation on Trump's desk Monday morning. Strike Iran's power grid and watch Saudi Aramco terminals and Emirati desalination plants burn. Brent crude at $200. A global recession that makes the 2008 financial crisis look manageable. Or announce a 5-day pause and call it diplomacy. He chose the pause. He chose it not because negotiations were progressing, Iran's own officials publicly denied any talks were occurring, but because the alternative was economic consequences that would devastate the very American economy Trump has spent years claiming credit for building. The man who ran on economic strength found himself staring at a scenario where his next military move could trigger the worst economic collapse in a generation. The ground war nobody planned. 5,000 U.S. Marines are currently converging on the Gulf. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, 2,200 Marines from Okinawa aboard the USS Tripoli. The 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, 2,500 Marines from San Diego aboard the USS Boxer, accompanied by 2 additional amphibious assault ships. The 82nd Airborne canceled exercises, fueling deployment speculation. This was supposed to be an air war. The fact that ground options are even being discussed at day 24 tells you the air campaign did not deliver what was promised. Pentagon planners are reportedly examining the possibility of seizing Karg Island, Iran's primary oil terminal responsible for handling roughly 90% of its crude exports. Karg sits about 26 kilometers off Iran's coast and approximately 300 kilometers northwest of the Strait of Hormuz, within range of every remaining Iranian weapon. Ballistic missiles from inland tunnel complexes, rocket artillery on the coastline, explosive drone boats, shore-based batteries. One retired rear admiral put it plainly, "If we seize Karg, they turn off the spigot on the other end." A former Army officer called it somewhere between a suicide mission and a self-imposed hostage crisis. Trump originally planned to have this conflict wrapped before a scheduled trip to China at the end of March. That trip has been postponed. This was always supposed to be a quick, clean air campaign. The ground options being discussed now tell you everything about how far reality has drifted from the plan, why Iran won't stop, and what that actually tells you. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said it directly on CBS on March 15th. "We never asked for a ceasefire. We never asked even for negotiation. We are ready to defend ourselves as long as it takes." He also made a point worth noting. He said Iran was in diplomatic contact with Americans when they decided to attack, and that it was the second time. That second time is important. Iran was in diplomatic dialogue before the June 2025 strikes. It was in diplomatic contact again before the February 28th attacks. Both times, it got bombed. From Tehran's perspective, American diplomatic outreach isn't an alternative to violence, it's a prelude to it. When Trump now says Iran is eager to negotiate and that productive conversations have occurred, Iran's instinct, shaped by two separate experiences of being bombed mid-negotiation, is to say no, issue a denial, and keep firing. That context explains why Iran's rejection of the ceasefire proposal isn't irrational, it's institutional memory. Ayatollah Khamenei was killed on the opening day of the operation, February 28th, when US and Israeli airstrikes struck his compound in Tehran. His death was confirmed by the Iranian Supreme National Security Council. The CIA had reportedly assessed prior to the attacks that if Khamenei were killed, he would most likely be replaced by hardline figures from the IRGC, not moderates, not reformists, not anyone inclined toward compromise. That assessment proved accurate. Iran's new leadership structure, operating under conditions of war and bereavement, has shown zero inclination towards ceasefire talks. Iran struck a U.S. Fifth Fleet Service Center in Bahrain early in the conflict. It fired missiles toward Diego Garcia. 4,000 kilometers from its own border, it has continued striking Israel, and it has kept the strait sealed. The IRGC's message to Gulf states hosting American forces was explicit. You gave your soil to be used against us, and we will not remain silent. The stated plan was 4 to 7 days of overwhelming air power followed by Iranian capitulation. Day 24, the IRGC is still firing. The strait is still shut. The radar shield covering American bases from Jordan to the UAE is functionally degraded. An F-35 was hit for the first time in combat history. Over a dozen Reapers gone. A $13 billion carrier docked in Greece for repairs. The other carrier 1,100 kilometers from the battlefield. 5,000 Marines heading toward a ground war nobody planned for. Brent crude near $100. The IEA calling it the worst energy disruption in modern history. Both governments are telling their publics they are winning. Both narratives contain claims that cannot be independently verified. Apply identical skepticism to CENTCOM saying its jets fly freely, and to Iran claiming massive drone kills. The evidence sits somewhere between those stories, and what it says is this: neither side planned for what is actually happening. The 5-day pause is not a diplomatic breakthrough. It is a man who ran out of options before he ran out of enemies. What happens when those 5 days expire, whether the shooting resumes, whether a deal materializes, or whether the world slides toward something far worse, is the most consequential open